Letting people in. Everyone, good morning. Good morning. As you're joining, if you could just introduce yourself in the chat, that would be great. And thank you all for being here today. We're very excited. We'll give people a couple more minutes to sign in. Hopefully people have gas and can get to wherever they need to get as well. North Carolina's been delightful the last couple weeks.
I certainly see the Triangle area represented this morning. I see some folks from the eastern part of the state as well, some Greenville, and then I'm here in New Bern. And then we've got friends at Vanderbilt. So really, in Asheville, wonderful. Thank you for being here. All right.
So
Deb,
Tony,
yeah, it's 11:02. I think maybe we can be respectful of that start time and go ahead and get into our town hall this morning.
absolutely. So Tony, if you can take over admitting people for a minute while I get us started, that would be great.
Sure.
I am Deb Ryan, and I'll introduce myself and have Tony introduce herself, and then we'll talk about sort of our agenda for today. My name is Deb Ryan. I am an independent educational consultant in the Triangle. I also work with two community-based organizations, one in North Carolina and one nationally, and I have also been on the faculty at Wake Tech Community College. And Tony, do you want to introduce yourself real fast?
Sure. My name is Tony Blunt. I reside in New Bern, North Carolina, and I am working with Deb this year on the SACAC Government Relations co-chair position. And I also work for Craven County Schools as the District Coordinator of College Advising and Scholarship, in addition to being a faculty member at a community college teaching personal health and wellness. So it is a pleasure to be with all of you today, and we look forward to our discussion.
I'm just going to talk about, again, as if you're just joining us, if you could please just introduce yourself in the chat, that would be great. And Tony, if you want to hit the next slide for the summary. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about brief background about what Tony and I have been doing since September, and then we're going to go through each of our policy requests and spend about 10 minutes on each of those. Hopefully be able to hear from representatives from our state government and from all of you in terms of those legislative requests and what your thoughts are and where we are with those. And then at the end, we're going to really talk about some action steps that we can take going forward. So just a really quick, brief overview of how we came to this point. Tony and I started doing this work in September. In December, many of you who are here today, and we appreciate your time so much, were at the brainstorming sessions that we held in order to really figure out what our legislative priorities should be. In January and February, we did tons of research and collected data. I want to give a shout out to Alice Dolbo, who I don't think is here today, from Latinx Ed, who helped us tremendously with getting data for our tuition equity information. And we then compiled that information, sent it to all of our state legislators and the governor. And then in March and April, Tony and I were able to meet with about a dozen of our state senators and representatives, again, for whom we're just so grateful for their time, to talk through these legislative priorities and hear from them what they're thinking about and what they're seeing in their own constituencies and in our General Assembly. We came up with these 4 priorities. So number one is the test optional policy for our UNC system for the next 3 years, a pilot program so that we can see how that would impact UNC admissions, system admissions. The second is increase student access to high school counselors. The third is to invest more heavily in infrastructure, digital infrastructure. And the fourth is tuition equity, so in-state tuition for undocumented students. I just again want to thank all of the state representatives and senators who were able to meet with us. It was very inspiring meeting with you and hearing that how much work you're doing on behalf of all North Carolinians. And it was also really informative. We learned a lot about sort of their perspective and how many of them either have students who are in the college process or how many of them have also at some point or other drafted legislation for many of our points, many of our legislative requests. So that was really, it's wonderful sort of coalescence of those things. What we're going to do today is we're going to split it into each of the four separate policy requests. I'm going to talk about two and sort of invite commentary, and then Tony is also going to talk about two. So the first what we'd like to discuss is that the UNC system remain test optional for a 3-year period to align the UNC system with other states and to increase access to higher education for students across the state and the country. And really at this point, if anyone has anything that they would like to say about this, we would welcome, please just unmute yourself and share with us how you feel about this, where things are for you. We would be particularly interested to hear from any of our admissions representatives that are here today, what they think about test optional for the next 3 years and sort of how that has gone this year with our test optional policy. So please just jump in, anyone who would like to share any thoughts about that. Don't be shy. I will talk then if people don't want to talk. What I have seen for my students, and Tony, you can jump in with this as well, is not having to submit a test score has been really empowering for them across the board, even for students who traditionally would be great test takers. Oftentimes they didn't have an opportunity to take very many tests. And, you know, we are, a lot of my students are feeling very anxious. My juniors are feeling very anxious about next year, not knowing quite yet. And I know that Sarah just said, we are seeing what happens with the UNC system, with the Board of Governors. If anyone has any thoughts about how to access the Board of Governors, that would also be very helpful. They are very, very hard to get a hold of. And I have been trying to keep track of their meeting notes and their upcoming agendas, but it was not part of the April meeting, and I'm not sure, I haven't seen the May meeting agenda yet, so we're hopeful.
I can see that Melissa wrote in the chat something that I can attest to as well. I think it's being left in limbo is what is really affecting a lot of our students right now, those that are finishing up the junior year, wondering what this means for them has been impactful on their level of stress. And just, you know, lots of families are reaching out to say, you know, we were registered for a test. We found out very soon before the test started that it was canceled. The school did not allow students to be admitted in. I've seen high school principals get buses and bus students from one county to another because their county wasn't offering it, but a neighborhood county was. So there's going to be just a lot of students that didn't have the same sort of access and just couldn't access a test, or maybe could access one, but didn't have a chance to then do some test prep and test again in hopes of obtaining a score that they were pleased with. So thank you, Melissa, for your comments, and Crosby Scholars. Okay, I support test optional through class of 2023, at least.
I would love to hear if any of our admissions professionals can just talk about, and if you can share, just how it went this year for you, having a test optional policy, if that was, you know, how it impacted things, if it made it more difficult, if it was not impactful. That I think is something that we'd like to hear. Scott Orvis just said, it'd be interesting to see how the Georgia system decision to return to required testing might influence the UNC system. Yeah, that just happened a couple of days ago. The Georgia system decided to abandon test optional for spring of 2022. So they will still be test optional for the fall, but from spring going forward, they will not be test optional any longer. And for those of us who are believe that test optional is a great policy, that was not a happy news to see at all. Anyone have any other thoughts about test optional policies? Again, this is not a legislative request necessarily, but when we were speaking with legislators, we were really asking for them to, whenever they talk with the UNC Board of Governors, to really enhance the idea that this is very much about empowering students across our state, and also taking the stress levels down for them whenever possible, because these kids have been through really unprecedented times this year. And Tony and I were talking just before we started the meeting about the mental health of these kids, and just how much that they've hit a wall, many of them, and I'm sure many of you have seen that as well. Any other thoughts or questions about test optional policies from anyone? Concerns?
Deb, I can talk about, who I connected with at the UNC system office, if that would be helpful.
That would be great. Sean, you were very instrumental last year before the July meeting. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so hi everybody, Sean Kennedy from Ravenscroft School in Raleigh. As I had done last year, been in contact with Dr. Bethany Meehan, who's the Vice President of Student Affairs for the UNC System Office. When I originally had reached out directly to the kind of public Board of Governors email, which is basically the only way you can connect directly with them, and I'll put the email in the chat in just a minute. She was the one that responded kind of on behalf of the Board of Governors, essentially. So, and we started a dialogue and the rest, and most of it was really, providing information that she did not have access to. It became fairly clear early on that a lot of the focus, or at least the understanding of the Board of Governors going into making those decisions, was largely based on the public school student access to testing at that particular moment, largely through the statewide ACT testing that usually occurs. And so at the time, they were operating under the assumption, well, because everybody, all the public school students took it, that is enough. And so what she was searching for were some other constituencies to see what was going on. So, I've helped facilitate providing information for private independent schools in the state. I know that there was an effort with homeschool students to provide that information, to sort of provide a little bit richer and deeper look at that landscape. And this time around, sort of she's asked for similar updates and the rest. And so, so she's been great about seeking information and talking to people about not only providing quantitative information that would be of value, but also qualitative about stories, about things, the student who gets things canceled unexpectedly and the rest. Like, I think there's nothing you can take for granted in terms of what you would think they would know and understand about what's going on with students, which is ironic. But the fact that it's really incumbent upon both the, high school counselor, the CBO, even the college admission official, to really educate the Board of Governors on the things that are happening. And, I think to position that, input is going directly to the Board of Governors is probably most important, because I'm sure, as I see John and Sarah McKenzie and the rest, like, going at the campus officials, it is not their place to make this, they I'm sure are involved in conversations with the system office, but they alone can't change that, can't change their own policies. So that's what I can share at this point. I don't have any specific information about about when it will be on the docket. Last year was it was July. So I do agree with Scott that the University System of Georgia, at least making that move, is possibly something that will help move the needle. But then again, there's also the case of Florida, the Florida university system from this past year that still saw, a modest increase in applications, I think about 6% in the end. So there's a lot of mixed evidence. So.
Well, and the University of Virginia system, so UVA and Virginia Tech will be test optional next year. So we're sort of surrounded by both perspectives, which I think is also incredibly interesting to sort of see which way the Board of Governors will lean. And I don't know how many of you watched that meeting last year, that July meeting, but it was a really close call. And I think, Sean, your point that the more data we can get to them, the better. So yeah, we have tons of information that we would love to share with Dr. Meehan. And so any help that you can give us with that would be great. And I think would be appreciated by everyone across the state. Tony, should we shift to and thank you so much, Sean, for all of your work as well. It's incredibly useful and helpful. Tony, should we shift to the student access to high school counselors point? And you can talk about that.
Absolutely. So this policy request is near and dear to my heart because I am in and out of high school counseling offices throughout my work week. And there are many counseling offices across North Carolina that have student ratios that are not in the best interest of the students. So we can say that, like right now in North Carolina, we're at a 1 to 386, and the American School Counselor Association recommends a 1 to 250. Which, when I say those words, it even sounds daunting to be able to meet the full needs of just 250 students, let alone the average in North Carolina, which is 386. So we know that when we increase student access to counseling, it has a lot of impact. But we know that when we're looking at retention, we're looking at graduation rate. We want counselors and students to be able to have the conversation of taking rigorous courses and helping them monitor how they're doing in those courses. Of course, the whole concept of career exploration and college research all come into play while they are working with students on social emotional issues. So this topic is really near and dear. We do know that there are some programs in North Carolina that are really focusing on this, which in our research, we found that the College Advising Corps data provided to us, we know that 142 college advisors support 162 high schools across 82 counties right now. And the goal for 2022-2023 is to increase to 162 advisors supporting 185 high schools across 100 counties. So we are excited about those numbers, but we still know that supporting a career and college-ready high school counseling curriculum requires more counselors to do that work in North Carolina high schools. We have some high schools in North Carolina that have a ratio of greater than 500 to 1. And then, of course, we have some that are 250 or less, but the majority range in about that 400 to 1 ratio. So I would love to be able to hear and get some discussion going on what you're seeing, what you can tell us about work with the high school counseling teams that you all have conversations with, especially from our higher ed folks, and how this policy request would change the way that you see this work happening in North Carolina.
I'll just interject for a second. So there have been some bills introduced in the legislature to increase school nurses, and so there is a focus on within the budget and within some of the COVID funds that have been made available to increase some support staff. What we're really hoping to see is that a much bigger increase in the school counselor ratio or the funding for school counselors. And I think part of this as well is tied to teacher pay too. And I'm not sure, those of you, I work with students across Wake County. Many of my students there's a huge turnover in their counselors within their schools. And I think that's part of the sort of endemic issues with teacher pay and the valuation that's given to teachers and administrators within our public high schools as well. Is anyone else here from a public school, or can speak to sort of the experiences that you've seen either within your constituency or within organizations that you work with? Lots of silence. Well, we're hoping that, again, if you have any additional information that you would want to put into the chat, this is a point of, it's a budget concern, which traditionally there's usually not money floating around, but this year there is money floating around because of the COVID issues. And so, Melissa, did you want to say something?
I had a question about kind of efforts around being able to put more counselors in schools, but also perhaps consider expanding the definition of a college counselor or access counselor. Because one of the challenges that we often encounter in admissions are folks who have experience who are looking to transition to a high school environment, an access environment, but do not have a school counseling license and may not have the time, effort, resources, ability to lean into getting for some second master's degree or taking time, full-time out of work. And one of the puzzles that I have that we've talked about in some NACAC spaces is, could there be, through DPI, Department of Public Instruction in North Carolina, could there be some discussion around creating a college counseling, college access license of some type that could be similar to a lateral entry for those of us who have worked in admissions and have, experience and can point to, trainings and professional competencies and things like that, that can help alleviate some of the challenges that come up in terms of getting students access to counselors for college, while also acknowledging that school counselors' jobs are so much broader than college access. It's a little bit of chicken and egg here, because school counselors, their job is often pushed into areas for which they are not necessarily intended to be, and they can't necessarily focus on college access, and they can't necessarily also focus on mental health and student support and things like that, because they often find themselves pulled into, disciplinary and scheduling and other issues. But I wonder if there's a way to take what could be a very healthy and ready pool here in North Carolina, let alone elsewhere in the country, for folks who may want to relocate to North Carolina, and leverage the connections we have in admissions and the competencies of our professionals, because there are a number of us who would love to work for a public high school, but our options are not there. And as Michelle just put in the chat box, yes, school counseling programs do not always teach college and career counseling anyway, which there is part of that being had in the counseling space through CACREP accreditation, of getting training incorporated into that. But are there other ways that we could pursue this through licensure and access for the professionals to facilitate it for students?
Well, and Melissa, in the UNC system graduate school counseling programs, only 2 of them offer a course specifically in college access counseling as part of the requirements for graduation.
Yep.
Chapel Hill is one and UNC Pembroke is the other. The other programs do not offer a high school focused college access course. There's career, there's whole host of other things around it, but not even a course specifically about that.
Yeah, and when I did my program in career counseling at NC Central, we briefly touched upon it in a career counseling course. But it was even acknowledged by our faculty. It was something we talked about within the program faculty of this is a missing gap not just in the program that we had, but in so many others.
And just a few years ago, the North Carolina Community College system supported the use of the college coaches, who would then go into the high schools and support the existing counseling staff on the registration and advising process for the Career and College Promise students. So that was a little bit of support. And I think what we found through that is an increase in enrollment of CCP courses. Even in the midst of the pandemic, there's been an increase in enrollment in those opportunities because our students and families had that extra level, that extra person there on those campuses, helping students to navigate what being a dual enrollment student is about and how important that opportunity is for students who want to continue on to a 2 or 4 year college after high school graduation.
And Melissa, I see your point about the National College Advising Corps, and I think that you know, we have a college advising corps in North Carolina, which, you know, Tony can really speak to some of the really wonderful work they've done, but there are limits to that. There's limits to how many there are of them. There are limits to it's a 2-year program. And so that consistency of engagement with students over time can be missing. I think it's, in some ways, the college advising corps is wonderful, but it's a little bit of a Band-Aid. And so, you know, I really love these ideas to help people who are have already been engaged with that work to shift into the school systems, I think. And I know at the last big SACAC meeting that we had at UNCW, one of the discussions there as well was sort of shifting the licensure for school counselors to include more of the college counseling piece of it. And, you know, I'm not sure at what level, who it needs to be in charge of that, but I think these are phenomenal ideas. And I'm very happy that Senator Davis and Representative Smith are here to hear sort of some of these ideas as well. It's really great.
Devin, one of the SACAC board members, Rachel Fried, who works in rural Appalachia, specifically in working with school districts to not just add programs to the schools, but to work with the district staff, counselors, the principals already employed on developing and building college access structures within the school to understand the components of it, and then to learn how to develop those systems within the school. I did a program prior to the SACAC conference about on-ramp that was for public school education. You know, have a ton of professional training through their master's programs and the rest, but because there was no college access specific one, sort of looking as a professional development opportunity to, you know, provide that training to add to the professional skills that they also already have, and to look at how to work within their school and their district to develop that college going culture. So that's, you know, that's a way to sort of also equip existing professional school counselors with that experience.
And Rachel was part of our brainstorming sessions in December. She's spectacular, and was, you know, sort of helpful for us to think about some of the document that we've sent to legislators has more of those pieces in it as well. And really thinking about sort of how to expand that role in many ways. You know, for many of our colleagues, particularly in some of the rural areas of North Carolina, you know, one of the things that we heard during the brainstorming sessions was that counselors are so engaged with their worries are really more, does this child have a roof over their head? Does this child have food? Is this child in a safe environment? That the college piece, even if they've been trained in that, isn't even something that they can access, because the concerns are just so much more, you know, sort of just really basic human needs. And so, you know, increasing access to counselors and including more counselors who have experience with the college access, I think all of that is really important as well.
Right. And thank you, Melissa, for your comment and suggestion on Nicole Hurd, from the national office, we can certainly use that information and do a reach out for that. So Deb, we are moving right along and about halfway through. Shall we go ahead and go on to policy request 2 or 3?
Yes.
All right. And Deb, this is you.
Yeah, so the digital infrastructure, as we talked with representatives and senators from across the state, this is a huge issue. It is on everyone's mind. When I talked to Representative Evelyn Terry, she's, I think, from the Greensboro area, she was just amazing in talking about how at the beginning of the pandemic, she found some students who were hanging out outside, and she said, "Why aren't you in school?" And they said, "We don't have any Wi-Fi at our house." And so she literally, over the course of 2 weeks, sort of had to basically badger one of the internet companies to install Wi-Fi into this one building in her constituency. And then 2 weeks later, she made sure that those kids were in their classrooms, via Zoom. As we have all seen, the pandemic has really exacerbated and highlighted issues with the digital divide. And as you all know, particularly those of you who are on the college side of things, you cannot apply to college at this point without having internet access. You can't do the FAFSA. You can't do the Common App. You can't, there's a lot on CFNC. There's just impossible. We have heard when we spoke with legislators that this is definitely a piece of what's going on in the legislature. Part of the issue is their House Bill 129 is particularly one of those sort of previous pieces of legislation that people thought was going to help, but ended up not being that helpful, because it really disallows for there to be competition, particularly in rural areas. And so it's not only being able to afford internet, but actually being able to access internet. And so, what we're hoping for is that there can be some public-private partnerships here that will expand access for students across the state so that everyone from their homes can get to the internet, which is really, even when students are able to go into school, so much of what they're asked to do as homework is also online. And Tony, talked about Craven County Community College put Wi-Fi into their parking lot so that students could come, students from across the county could come and do homework in their cars on their phones during the pandemic. And it's just really unacceptable. I'd love to hear from people across the state what you've seen with this in your areas, what you've seen with this with your students, any thoughts that anyone has about other ways that we can help students and families gain access to the internet, because that's really the way going forward that people have to have it in order to succeed. Any thoughts? Tony, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Over the last year, if we did not have our college admissions folks reaching out to the high schools and offering the virtual college admissions tours and the virtual presentations on financial aid and admissions, our students would not have connected. They couldn't get on the sidewalks and walk the halls and sit in the admissions visits at the college campuses. So that's just an example of the importance of having that technology, certainly in the last 12 months, but moving forward, I just think we're going to see such a robust increase in that sort of work because we can now, we figured it out. But those that are still lacking in their internet capabilities will not have those same opportunities to be able to explore those options before those decisions need to be made. Yeah, and so the silver lining here in our local area with COVID has been that we've realized where the gaps were the strongest and tried to support those folks with additional hotspots. And we still saw families struggling with multiple people in the family accessing the internet at the same time in their homes, all the students at home, all trying to get on Zoom sites with their teachers and the parents working from home. it's been an interesting journey, I'm sure, as you all have had as well over the last year, but we would love to take this opportunity and really do something with it and be able to learn from this and help our families access what they need to for college access and admissions.
Link to John has a link to an article to an access for broadband. How Pell Grant recipients could qualify for broadband internet discount. I'm not sure, John, I don't know if you could speak to if that is something that's happening in North Carolina, or if that is something that's sort of a national initiative.
It just came out yesterday, so I don't know a ton about it, but the article indicates that the FCC, so that department, plans to reach out to roughly 6.5 million Pell Grant recipients to tell them they may be eligible, and working with the FCC to create materials to help schools share information about the offer. So, it sounds like there is going to be something. It's definitely at the national level, not local. But particularly for those of you that are in high schools that work with Pell Grant recipients, if you have the ability to be in touch with those families, or those students, that may be something to at least encourage them to pay attention to or look for more information, and that may help offset it. Because I agree, I forget who exactly said, telling the students to come park in the community college parking lot to get free Wi-Fi. We heard that from our community college partners last year. Or there was an article back in the fall, particularly in the New York Times, particularly about North Carolina and Robeson County, where they had buses driving around that had mobile Wi-Fi, and they'd stay in a neighborhood for an hour or two, and that was sort of the response to provide Wi-Fi and connectivity, which, that's one thing, but if they don't have the devices or the proper devices to connect and be able to do their work, last spring, the article about the student taking an AP exam on his iPhone at a McDonald's, just is etched in my brain as one of the worst casualties of what we've been through the last few months. So at least there seems to be some attention on it. So hopefully this will be something to help us all in terms of the broadband issue.
And I see, Maria, thank you so much for sharing that with us. The Eliminate the Digital Divide Act is introduced in the U.S. House and Senate. And I know that part of Governor Cooper's budget as well, digital infrastructure is part of his budget. I think within the North Carolina legislature, as always, it is figuring out who gets what and when. It's going to be part of that funding. But I think in many ways, this is, it is a national issue. The problem for us in North Carolina is that the people typically who are most in need are the last thought of. And so what we're hoping is that we can draw attention to the people who most need this, and to increase competition within those rural areas so that there are, greater choices for people, and more affordable choices as well. Tony, should we shift to in-state tuition?
Sure. So we'll go on to our policy request number 4, which is in-state tuition from undocumented students. And so, of course, you can see on the slide what the request is, but we're looking at the tuition equity issue here in this statement. And we also want to, to focus on the benefits of tuition equity when we're thinking about this request. We want to be able to support the idea of fulfilling occupational shortages. We do know that through My Future NC's goal of ensuring that by 2030, 2 million North Carolinians have high quality credentials or post-secondary degrees. This is directly related to this work that we're doing in North Carolina. This could certainly add tuition revenue for higher ed institutions and increase investment back into the North Carolina economy. So we do want to make sure that we say that we know that in-state tuition is not the same as free tuition. It means that tuition would be paid by the student, and that there are some programs at some North Carolina community colleges now called the Business Scholarship, where if a student does not get in-state tuition, they can apply for that business scholarship and be sponsored by that business to get that in-state tuition. And some, those are employee-based types of scholarships. But these are some of the points that where we are now with this discussion, and would love to hear from all of you on your comments or your evidence of how you could see that this would be a policy request that you could embrace. Thank you, Sarah, for your comment. Oh, I'm sorry. Any other discussion here?
I was just going to say, and this is definitely one of the things that when talking with representatives and state senators, that this was probably the most discouraging aspect of our policy requests, because everyone, well, most of the people we spoke to were very much for this, but realized that in North Carolina, it is a very difficult, with our legislature as it currently stands, it is a very difficult point to get across. And often in-state tuition for undocumented students gets overshadowed by issues that people might have with immigration. And so really trying to figure out ways to talk about this in very real, rational, data-driven arguments is probably the best way forward for us. A couple of the legislators that I had spoken with had introduced legislation in the past few years for exactly this, for tuition equity, that didn't pass. But they, we were encouraged to hear that they said, keep talking about it, keep asking for it, because, making noise about it is the way to get attention to it. And Senator Davis, it might have been you actually who said that it's not a short game, this is a long game. And that for many of these issues, it is not going to be 1 year that these are passed or 1 year that these are, that they come to fruition, but that continuing efforts over time is really what's going to make things happen. And so I feel like this request in particular is one that we're going to be readdressing consistently, perhaps for several years, before it can gain the traction that we hope that it does. Melissa, thank you. Yeah, reframing with an eye towards economic goals. And that was what we heard from representatives and state senators, was that anytime that you can put numbers to things and talk about economic benefits, that is always going to be a way to win hearts and minds in some ways. So, and again, I just want to shout out to Alice Elbow, who is not here today with Latinx Ed, who really gave us tremendous pieces of information and so much support in crafting this request. Just amazing pieces of information and things that really were eye-opening for me as well.
Okay, so let's move into our summary and next steps, since we want to honor your time this morning, but we also want to end in a way that we want to collect as much from you as we can and continue this discussion as we all move forward. So my next few moments is going to be directed towards the SACAC members, and then Deb will take over for our elected officials. And I'd just like for you to look at the questions that we've posed this morning. So certainly, what are the issues you would like for us to uplift around these 4 policy requests, or even broader? And thank you for already sharing some of those things in the chat for us. And then also, what next steps would you like to see for government relations? So the work that Deb and I will help lead around these requests. So I'll open that up. Please unmute and share.
This is also, oh, Manjiri, thank you so much for sharing. We have a good presence of independent educational consultants. Perhaps we can leverage to support public school counselors via SACAC. This is to support and help with the fabulous work that school counselors do, not a solution to policy request number 2, but until it is addressed. Yeah, that's definitely one of the things in our regional IEC group that we've talked about, is ways to partner independent counselors with public school counselors. I think for whatever reason in the past, there have sometimes not been great relationships there. But I think that when we understand that all of us are working towards the greater success of all of our students, I think that's a really great partnership that we could think about, really leveraging to, again, increase that access to counseling. But my husband and I are moving to Washington, North Carolina, to Little Washington, come visit in a couple months. And that's actually one of the things that I'm hoping to do in the Beaufort County schools is partner with particularly the Washington public high schools, partner with them to do college workshops, to open up those conversations so that we can just, again, create access for more students whenever is possible. Any other thoughts from people about, and again, these were our 4 policy requests this year. Are there other things that you're seeing that you would like for us to address, to research, to, propose ongoing? Are there other things that have come up this spring that you're seeing that should be addressed at all? Sean, yeah, Higher Ed Works is fantastic. Yes, thank you. There's also, there's some great, I can share them later, I can't get them right now, but there are some great legislative agenda news blogs that come out kind of daily that will also help you see just sort of everything that's going on in the legislature as well, which is super interesting.
Yeah, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention the need to continue the support and the work that CFNC is doing, and My Future NC, and of course the Carolina Advising Corps. So all of these organizations certainly help support the work that counselors are doing in the schools, and also in many of the conversations about our other policy requests. Mm-hmm. So the North Carolina SCAA and the work that Catherine Marker is doing with the Finish the FAFSA in North Carolina is a step to help embed those resources into the school so that so we don't feel alone when we're trying to help our students. So those are all as well organizations that I certainly have highly used and networked with and would hope would continue in the future.
Manjeri, can you just speak a second to the NC Education Corps? I know that you guys in HECA in particular have been talking more about that. Can you talk just for a minute more about what you know about what's going on over there? If you're here still. I've lost her. That's definitely one of the things that there are 2 organizations, Independent Educational Consultants Association and the Higher Education Consultants Association. That's one of the things that nationally that we are also trying to do is, again, engage with schools and with CBOs to increase that access to college admissions counseling through some of those cores as well.
Deb, you want to convert the...
Yeah, absolutely. So elected officials, I'm not sure, Senator Davis and Representative Smith, if you're still with us, if you would want to share with us any thoughts that you have about how we in SACAC can engage with the legislature and things that you would like for us to do at all. Hello, Senator Davis, how are you?
Hey, doing great today. How about yourself, Deb?
Good to see you.
And to each and every one of you, and definitely it's always a pleasure to join great counselors as well as my colleague Candy Smith, who we shared a district together.
That's why I'm yielding to you. That's why I'm yielding to you.
Well, let me start with maybe some words of hope after that last priority there. I'm going to start my presentation by simply saying, ask and it shall be given, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open. But the contrary to that is if we don't ask, if we don't seek, and if we don't knock, then we get nothing. And that's the importance of having this association. I want to start with the first. I didn't want to share that for fall 21, there's already the waivers in place. And I just want to make sure that was clear for fall 2021. So right now, I believe we're still waiting for the decision for spring 22 and beyond. And I truly just appreciate adopting that priority. I think it's a priority we need to give serious consideration to, even beyond the pandemic to some extent. That's just my personal thoughts on it. So we're definitely supportive and would encourage everyone to continue to push forward. The Board of Governors are broken into committees. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe Temple Sloan is head of the committee that engages with the waiver there. So if we're looking for a specific person, board member, then that will actually be the person to talk to. And and we need to obviously, continue to push because of timing. Timing will be of the issue. I would anticipate, even though they've not made the decision for spring yet, that would be any time. The next point that I want to really jump into, dealing with the infrastructure, and I really want to be clear. When the pandemic hit, and just want to let all the members know, we were scrambling around, trying to put in place even a remote learning program. So what you saw in the initial COVID package, you saw we invested in bus connectivity, hotspots, student devices, staff devices, so that we can make this transition. One thing that I would ask for us to consider, and we can't take this lightly either, as part of this digital checklist that we need to advocate for, and everybody should get this. Everybody should get this one now, and that's cybersecurity. That's why it's been difficult for us to get to the gas pump the last few days, and we have a lot of systems, within our educational network that we have to protect. We did put a little $4 million in cybersecurity, which we technically underfunded the request for cybersecurity, but these were somewhat of the patchwork that we needed and the steps we know that we had to take just to get the kids to a remote format. As we continue to work and move forward, I'm one of the primary sponsors on our fall COVID bill, because COVID, a lot of restrictions are being lifted, but it's still with us, and we're still taking steps to prepare our school districts for this upcoming school year. What you'll see, we've increased the number of remote learning days and a process to get to those days in cases of emergencies. You're going to still see at least 5 of those days that'll be built into the calendar. But the point that I'm making here is you're absolutely correct. We have to continue to look long term. And it wasn't just those investments in the Band-Aid to make the transition real quick to remote, but it's really too looking at the larger infrastructure network. And what is promising is during that time when we began the COVID discussions, we have in the state of North Carolina, our Department of Information Technology, and there's what's called the Great Grant programs. And that's for rural communities in particular, where they can apply for grants to get access to enhancing their internet infrastructure. What we did last session in the midst of the pandemic, which actually was fully implemented at the top of this year, was went to the department, DIT, and asked for all the communities that had pending grant applications. And we went back and funded pretty much most of those, if not all. I believe all of the eligible applications were actually funded. And that was a change in gear. I mean, we went and put, I believe it was about $30 million to fund these grant applications that are sitting out there. And this is what, again, what I want to highlight. This is kind of been the signature program for getting infrastructure dollars for internet broadband access, in particular in rural communities. So we are funding those. And I just want everyone to know that we are funding those. The other thing that I've been engaged in with DIT, there's a new secretary that's come in, but this is something I've been really big on. Infrastructure for broadband is extremely expensive. Your private companies, they don't want to go into high dense areas that it's going to just cost them and they're not going to get the return. So what you tend to see state grants through the GREAT program. You see typically federal grants through the USDA that channels dollars into these communities to help kind of supplement and encourage companies to get into these communities. What we're seeing overwhelmingly, proportionally, there's been more that's gone into fiber. And long story short, something that I want to continue to push the conversation along, and it's just something for us to understand and be aware of, and that's the wireless. I really believe that wireless will help us employ infrastructure into some of these rural communities much faster than it's going to take for us time-wise to plan out and build out fiber. So this is it's just something we need to continue to talk. Fiber is more durable, but some people, if we don't do something different other than rolling out a slow plan to fiber, it's going to take decades to get them out into some of these spots, and that's where you kind of the wireless is much more durable than these hot spots. So it's just something for us, I think we need to jump into. And the last thing that I want to highlight in particular, with our undocumented, Deb, I did say, look long term, but what I would also highlight, this is just me in my opinion, knowing the dynamics of Raleigh as it stands today, I think it'll be essential for us to see more comprehensive federal policy. And once you see that federal policy, I think it would probably give more leeway for not only North Carolina, but other states to begin to move, because we would have a better idea of where things are going. The other thing that I would highlight is, it's such a sensitive topic. And I think, Deb, you're 100% right, that it will be driven by the economics of the decision. And I think that, I'm really pleased to see that My Future's NC has it as a component, because when you look at the changing dynamics of North Carolina, it's going to require us to do something different quickly. And I believe that as long as we can continue to get the business community, behind the idea of why we need a well-educated workforce to fill these gaps in the future, I believe those are two essential components to this, that business aspect as well as federal comprehensive immigration policy that may really drive that decision in terms of how we educate undocumented. So thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to just share some thoughts. Representative Smith kind of took some of her time too, and I apologize for that. But I'm going to end.
I yielded my time to you, man.
but I'm going to end on this note, and like I said, being encouraged in all of this, If we don't come together, have these conversations, ask,
It's
knock,
12 o'clock.
then it's all in vain. So thank you so much. And I'm sorry, that was my computer that said that.
Thank you so much, Senator Davis. Representative Smith, do you have anything that you'd like to add for from your viewpoint as a representative, as what you're seeing in your constituency as well?
You know, that's a setup question.
I had the best conversation with Representative Smith. I just have to tell you.
And I'm excited about your move to Washington. I still plan to come there and check out the bookstore.
Awesome.
But I do want to say that I echo the sentiments of what was stated by Senator Davis. And then I also ask for you guys to continue the work that you're doing and having meetings like this to identify what issues or what things that you think that we can do or that you guys could have that would better suit you and help you in your positions or to provide the best services. I think that continues to be important steps. Now, we do know that I think someone said it was like 1 in 300 and something. And I was thinking about that because we've been talking about that very thing about how we have to increase numbers when it comes to the counselors. We've also been talking about that with the nurses as well. We have so much that we're having to tackle. And those COVID dollars did help us some. We just now, when we're working on the budget, let's just pray that we've had enough people to be able to hear and understand these needs, because a lot of these things pour over into other situations. So it's a multifaceted approach. But then when you're dealing with 170 people, I can't even tell you. So if we feel like we have it right in the House, when it goes to the Senate, they look at it and be like, there's no way, and vice versa. And so we as a delegation try to make sure that we are on the same page so that we can provide the necessary support to people in our area and other areas and identifying what the needs are. So being able to listen in, I almost felt like I was a fly on the wall in this town hall, helped give me more insight on things that I can continue to encourage and support. I am on the university committee as far as the education with universities. And so I was listening to some of that, but I'm also on K-12. So just putting all of the information together, it's a lot. And I know you guys deal with a lot. And I just say thank you for what you do. But I truly echo everything that Senator Davis said. And I do think that number one major concern has been this broadband. And we've had several broadband bills that's just continuing to be introduced. But Wi-Fi, like he stated, more than likely is going to be the way. Because if some of you would not have reached out to those high school seniors that you talked about and giving them some of those virtual tours, and life would have been at a standstill for many of them. So I just say keep doing what you're doing. You guys are doing an excellent job, and it may be thankless, but just do know that people do appreciate it. And thank you so much for allowing me to listen in, so that I can know how to better fight and advocate for your concerns and your needs in the House. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you both for being here today, and thank you both for your service so much to our state. Just the best conversations with both of you, and I'm just so deeply appreciative of your time. It's past 12, so we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for all of you, for all of your insights. And if you have ideas, if you have suggestions, if you have concerns, please feel free to reach out to us, to Tony or myself or both of us. You've gotten our emails, I'm sure, so you've got all of our information. And we hope that you have a wonderful spring, a wonderful end to the school year. And we will be back in touch in the fall again, once we continue this work and are thinking about, going forward, what we've learned from this year. Hopefully next year we'll be able to do this in person. We'll have a legislative day when we can actually all meet together and head into the buildings in Raleigh and knock on some doors. But thank you again all for your time today. Tony, anything else you want to add?
No, I just ditto your comments. It's been a pleasure seeing folks from across the state and beyond, and from lots of different organizations. So we appreciate it, and we wish everyone a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you so much.